So in this case, the owner has very kindly allowed me to use her voice. It's really important to hear the authentic voice of the owner as opposed to my voice. Listen to it and then we'll chat. So you're just saying about, so Rentokil did the injections.
So originally, so that was when we moved into the property. That was in 2004, and 2006. We had it assessed by Rentokil, and they said it was rising damp, and they hacked off all the plaster, injected it from the outside, and since that point had a yearly policy, like an insurance policy that covers rising damp and wood-boring insects. And that part of the company had come round to assess it because we knew we had a problem. They kept saying that's condensation. Then the actual rising damp part of the company came round and said it's definitely rising damp. You need to hack off all the plaster, have it re-injected. At which point we looked like, well, we're being told two completely different things. One of you are telling us to have rising damp treatment done because you want us to pay for it. The other part of the company is saying it's condensation because they don't want to pay for us to have the rising damp. So we just lost all faith in that they were giving us any information that was correct. So we just cancelled all the work that was planned and got you to come out and give us an independent opinion, because hopefully now we won't have to have all that work done.
So the issue in this property is it's been damp proofed. We have to think, what was the root cause that resulted in the damp proofing? What is the current root cause of damp? And let's look at the woodworm element as well. So I have a suspicion, but I don't know, that the original root cause of damp were hygroscopic salts, because there's a chimney breast. A majority of hygroscopic salts come from chimney breast, then from equine urine. It is true that groundwater also produces hygroscopic salts. However, in London, you don't have groundwater, and you can see from looking outside that there's a hill, so there's no way there could be groundwater. So there can't possibly have been rising damp, and there should never have been rising damp treatment. The modern method of dealing with hygroscopic salts is to paint over an oil-based primer, which actually is what Rentokil eventually did in this property, because obviously the damp proofing failed, and it doesn't work well, because what you're doing is you're putting a wet impermeable plaster, albeit not a lot of water, there's still dampness in it, so the hygroscopic salts will come through to the surface of the impermeable layer. Much better to use an oil-based primer such as Zinsser cover stain. But it looks like that element has been solved, but there was an issue with condensation, and we'll look at the data loggers now, and then we will start to look at the woodworm and treatment shortly. So here's the data from the data loggers. I've preloaded it, but just to show you a few things. One is you can upload the files here, select which is the wall you want to use as the damp wall and the comparative source of vapour. The temperature at the time of the survey was 17 degrees centigrade on the coldest part of the wall. The graph, so if you press the graph, it will produce this, and then it will, then we can see various things. This is summertime, and yet the surface relative humidity is about 90%, which is obviously very high. And you're going to get mold in that area. This is the surface temperature. It's using this temperature here, so it's an illustration. The closer you get the data logger to the coldest part of the wall, the better, the more accurate. Here, this line here is the dew point line. Now, in a perfectly ventilated property, the dew point line will be the same internally as externally, because you're replacing internal vapor with external air with external vapor in it. This line here is showing me the dew point differential, this baseline, and when it's higher than 0, you're getting more vapor now from between the damp wall and the vapor source. So the reason why it's higher here is basically because condensation is being released, and as it warms up, so you get a release of condensation. That's my best guess, insofar as I'm only looking at 24 hours and it's summertime. In winter, you can tell a lot more, But what you want to be doing is keeping this dew point below the outside temperature, which it is during this period. But as I say, it's summertime. You have all the hallmarks of a vapor issue. You've got a kitchen next to an open plan living room. The kitchen doesn't have a functioning extractor fan. It isn't ducted out. You've got a utility room where clothes are being dried, and that's near to the living room. And so excess vapor is where the internal dew point is above the outside temperature. But it's made worse by things like poor airflow from the radiator. The radiator is a long way from the corner. The corner is going to get a lot of heat loss. Plus you've got the cupboard doors are going to close in any humidity. So when you open it up, the vapor is going to come in, close it up, and you won't get any airflow. So that vapor will then condense on the wall and cause the timber to rot. I think you've got two types of woodworm. I think you've got wood weevil as well as common furniture beetle. It's unusual to see it in the same zone. It doesn't really matter. Wood weevil actually, so I think you've got cellar rot. Again, it doesn't really matter because it's not structural. It's just aesthetics look. It could be structural to this piece of furniture, but use permethrin once every 3 years. It's much better to do it yourself because you've got control over it. Take photos. I would remove all the timber that is flaking or isn't structurally sound. Suck the frass and the mold away with a vacuum cleaner with a HEPA filter, which most vacuum cleaners will have, just because you don't want to be breathing in the dust. Spray HG anti-mold spray to get rid of the mold. Keep the cupboard door open. Obviously, I don't think you'll want your dog to be involved in that process, so you might have to close the cupboard door at times. But let it dry out as much as possible. I would use a dehumidifier, a fan to speed up the drying out process. And yeah, every year for 3 years, you want to spray with permethrin and take photos before, just to make sure that it isn't coming back. Much better than to use a company, because they're only going to come once. The life cycle of the common furniture beetle is 3 years, and woodworm, wood weevil will disappear once the rot stops growing. Cellar rot needs a source of water, which is condensation. If you remove the condensation because you're ventilating, dehumidifying sufficiently so that the internal dew point's below the outside temperature, then you won't have a risk of ongoing rot. And wood weevil. The woodworm does need permethrin though. So you wanted me to check for the root cause of damp, and in my opinion is condensation, and I've discussed the woodworm as well. Thank you very much for the survey. Just as final thought, one of the key reasons that you're getting heat loss in the corner is because of the damp proofing. So damp proofing is replacing good plaster which has lots of micro holes in them with plaster that doesn't have any holes. That's because it's trying to block the passage of water. That reduces the temperature, increasing the surface relative humidity and therefore increasing the risk of condensation. In addition, you're removing the breathability or vapor buffering effect of the wall, which also increases the risk of condensation. So the damp proofing has increased the dampness there, probably caused the water from condensation has probably caused the socket to fuse and made the woodworm worse.